Fans here in Daytona probably still grabbing for their program, trying to figure out just who number 10 is. He is 32-year-old Greg Sachs in a research and development car from DiGard Racing.
It's 1985, and Bill Elliott is kicking everyone's butt on the speedways. Prior to the Firecracker 400, Elliott has already won Daytona, Atlanta, Darlington, Talladega, Dover, Pocono, and Michigan. 7 of the 14 races. More importantly, he was dominating at the motor tracks. You know, those places where you need some serious horsepower. Now, the most impressive of all those wins had to be Talladega, where Elliott came back from 2 laps down. No, he didn't get a yellow to get his laps back. There were no lucky dogs or free passes. He made up 2 laps under green at Talladega.
A few laps from the finish now, you still see that tremendous lead that Bill Elliott has. The next super speedway run is at Charlotte on the Memorial Day weekend. Will they change the rules between now and then? These Fords are almost completely unbeatable. You're looking at the battle for second place. Cale Yarborough, number 28, leads the 7-Eleven machine of Kyle Petty. There's the number 9 car. It's the leader. They started out with Yarborough in the lead, and then Elliott took over. Then Elliott had problem with an oil line. He dropped 2 laps back. He drove his way back into the lead and is now the leader at the Alabama 500 at Talladega as the white flag comes out with just 1 more lap to go for Elliott.
Bill Elliott's like Secretariat in the Belmont Stakes. You can't get second place in the same camera shot.
Miles an hour, the last sprint when he doesn't even have to go that fast.
We are watching history being made here in Alabama. This is going to be the fastest 500 miles ever run. We're just over 186 miles an hour. The fastest race to this point was the 1980 Daytona 500 at 177. And Bill Elliott screams now for the checkered flag. Again, completely dominating this race. He came from behind, and Elliott wins the Alabama 500 at Talladega. Look at that machine pass under the checkered flag.
No one had an answer for Bill Elliott, the number 9 car. It got to the point where NASCAR even stepped in and started tweaking on the Fords. One team accepted the challenge, DiGard, and they built a car for Daytona that could beat the Fords and Bill Elliott. Now, this is based on several interviews I listened to with Bobby Allison, Bill Gardner, and Robert Pemberton. So here's the gist of what happened as I understand it. Gary Nelson, Bobby Allison's crew chief for 16 wins and 1 championship, had several ideas he'd like to apply to a speedway car. How about that photo? Bobby Allison, Robert Yates, Gary Nelson. Give me those 3 on any team, any era, and they'll win you a lot of races. Now, before we get into the Bobby Allison versus Gary Nelson, let's take a moment and examine who Bobby Allison was. He had his own garage in Hueytown. He built a lot of cars. Some of these cars raced in NASCAR. He had an idea of what he wanted in his cars from top to bottom. And because Bobby could be stubborn, stuck in his ways, he knows best what to do with the car, this could cause some conflict with a crew chief or an engineer working with Bobby, which is nothing new with drivers. This is not something that's unique to Bobby Allison. It just seems that Bobby had more of these type of encounters than others, or just was unwilling to ever compromise. So Gary tells Bobby his plan for some changes to the chassis and the direction he would like to go with the car. Bobby does not agree. I think we should do this to the car. What do you think?
Hell no, to the no, 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 hell to the no.
And shortly thereafter, the two of them are at odds, to the point where Gary tells DiGard's owner Bill Gardner he can no longer work with Bobby and gets permission to recruit Robin Pemberton to join DiGard as Bobby's crew chief for 1985. Robin agrees, allowing Gary to focus more on the R&D department. At some point, Gary has come in contact with an engineer working at Ford named Paul Gildman, who's been instrumental in the non-car development. Gary convinces Bill Gardner to hire this Ford engineer, and with his help, Gary lays out his plan for building a new car to be driven by Bobby Allison. Bobby doesn't want anything to do with his gimmick car. Now, Bill Gardner gives Gary the go-ahead to build the car. If Bobby Allison doesn't want to drive it, we'll get another driver. If it works, then whatever we learn can be applied to Bobby's car in the future. That was the initial plan. Gary Nelson builds what is dubbed as the DiGard R&D car, and brings in Greg Sacks as the driver. They would use the car to test a variety of setups during practice and qualifying for the Firecracker 400 at Daytona. The car performed extraordinarily well and qualified for the race. So now the plan changes to, let's see how it runs in the race. Maybe 30 laps, and we'll park it. Besides, they didn't even have a full pit crew, so no way could they run an entire race. Here we go. It's the Daytona Firecracker 400, thanks to Car and Track. Now this is just the condensed version of the race. As you can see, we've already got the spotlight on Bill Elliott, who's sitting on pole.
This was the seemingly magical touch that Bill Elliott applied to his mysterious Grand National machine on pit road at the Daytona International Speedway moments ago. This car, number 9, has been so dominating that the drivers pursuing him now know the line, "Cars are cars," is a lie in 85. Now on the pace lap, pistons are pumping, hearts are too, as everybody in the field chases Bill Elliott.
Now NASCAR had already implemented a midseason change to the Fords, hoping that would slow down Bill Elliott. I guess it did to a certain extent. I mean, he'd already won 7 races, and after they made the change, he only won 4 more, but he still had a lot of horsepower.
Away, we are ready to unfurl the green at the 27th running of the Firecracker 400. It is underway, and already Bill Elliott, the man from Dawsonville, Georgia, is out in front of this 41-car field.
Well, you know, Al, it's expected that we might see a lot of engine problems during this race, at least in part because of this new restrictor plate in the carburetor that limits the amount of air going into the engine. These are the new rules that I spoke of. The idea was to choke off the air going into the engine, limit the horsepower a little bit, and slow the speed. But right now, Bill Elliott is lapping at over 193 miles an hour, which is only a couple of miles an hour off what he lapped at here in the Daytona 500 during the winter when it was cooler and you'd expect speeds to be higher. So it really has not had much effect among the top running teams who figured out how to get around this new carburetor rule.
Trouble in turn 1. Richard Petty and Tim Richmond have collided coming out of the tri-oval. That is Tim Richmond's car screeching along the pavement. Richard Petty has crossed the track and is currently in the infield.
Check out this hustle from Tim Richmond. Look at him run all the way down the hill there. Good job, Tim. Get off the track. Then we got a flashback to the 1984 Firecracker 400. This was Richard Petty's 200th win. Little known fact, 1984, Richard Petty's driving for Curb Racing. Curb Racing is leasing their engines from DiGard. So win number 199, win number 200 were powered by DiGard engines. So when you see this car in the Smithsonian, engine in that car belongs to DiGard. I'm guessing they couldn't get it back.
Pit road, the field is jumbled as we're ready for green once again in the Firecracker 400. And with the restart, Benny Parsons leads the field.
So on the restart, we got Bill Elliott running 5th. Let's see how long it takes him to get back to the lead.
For his first Grand National win in 3rd. Neil Bonnet, number 12 in 4th. And Bill Elliott has restarted this race in 5th position.
And Kyle Petty, now, who you see here running in 3rd place, of course, saw the accident involving his father and Tim Richmond, so that may be working on his mind a little bit right now.
Elliott slides out of the draft. He wants to make a move. This will be a strong test for
Watch Bill Elliott as he's able to just pull out past cars at will, it seems. Reminds me a lot of that number 8 Budweiser car we saw in the early 2000s.
Now still Benny Parsons, Dale Earnhardt, and Kyle Petty as they approach the tri-oval and the start-finish line here in front of a crowd estimated at 75,000. Lead changes now as these cars thunder into turn 1. Dale Earnhardt, who started amazingly in 18th position, has moved in front. Benny Parsons, removed from the draft, is sliding behind as Bill Elliott moves into 3rd. And now it is Earnhardt, Petty, and Elliott as these cars prepare to cover the backstretch of 3,000 feet in 10 seconds.
And Elliott making another move up on the inside, blocked momentarily there by Kyle Petty, who now takes the lead as Bill Elliott moves down inside Dale Earnhardt and into 2nd place.
Kyle Petty takes his Thunderbird into 1st position. His dad, a winner 10 times on his super speedway, he still looks for win number 1. But he says this week, and at this time, he has never felt better behind the wheel of a Grand National stock car.
You mentioned Al Petty's Thunderbird. Of course, Bill Elliott is in the Thunderbird as well. But these are really, this is confusing because it's only the bodies of these cars that are similar in any way to normal passengers.
Well, it didn't take too long, just a few laps. Bill Elliott's about to take the lead from Kyle Petty, but if you look back there, you see Greg Sacks peeking out. Here he comes. Now, since the condensed version, I have no idea where Bobby Allison is running, but at some point, Bobby Allison starts having some kind of mechanical issue, and he falls off several laps.
And a surprise in third, a research and development unsponsored car. Greg Sachs is there. Richard's son Kyle being challenged in the backstretch as Greg Sachs slides in front and almost loses it. Kyle Petty now drops behind, and Neil Bonnett's Chevrolet is right behind Greg Sachs.
At this point, we're getting late in the race. There's been some major attrition. There's only 24 cars still running. As you can see, the two in a league of their own, Bill Elliott and Greg Sachs.
Along with Sam Posey in what has now become a two-car race, as Sachs and Elliott have opened up a 3.5 to 4 second lead on the field.
Here we go, lap 99. Greg Sachs is going to take the lead for the first time today. Now, a reminder, they don't have a full pit crew. They only have a partial crew. Since Bobby Allison is having issues, they've started pulling members off Bobby Allison's crew to come pit for Greg Sachs. At one point, Bobby Allison comes into pit, and he's short a few tire changers because they're down in Greg Sachs's pit, which makes him hotter than a $2 pistol.
I'm with Gary Nelson, the crew chief on the Sachs car. Gary, your car carries no sponsorship of any kind, and it's being driven by a driver relatively unknown in this sport, and yet you're leading the race. What's going on here?
Well, we're real happy. This is an experimental car. We put a lot of new ideas in that we've always wanted to try, but it's a big gamble to try them on Bobby's number 22 car.
Bobby Allison's car.
Right. If it didn't work, we could go back further, but we were able to gamble, no sponsor to answer to. You know, we were able to say, okay, the wildest thing we can think of, we're going to do on this car, and it looks like it's paying off, at least here at Daytona. We're happy.
What are a couple of the things you did? It seems to be working.
I don't want to tell you that.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, he's not going to tell you how this car is cheated up. I'm sure the car was completely legal. And the rumor for all these years has been they had an oversized engine, but it passed pre-inspection, it passed post-race inspection. So if it did, they didn't find it. But if you notice, Gary's still trying to play the diplomat, saying these changes were so extreme, so out of the box, they were too much of a gamble to try on Bobby Allison, which, in truth, Bobby Allison did not want to drive this car. Now, this is according to Bill Gardner, who also said everything that was used on this car would have been available for Bobby Allison in the next race. But by that time, bridges had been burned and it was too late.
You were Greg Sachs right now. This is the moment, the opportunity of a lifetime. He must be as astonished as we are to find himself trailing Bill Elliott at this close range. But of course, you know, we're just watching. He's got to drive the car and keep that excitement in check so that it doesn't lead to a mistake.
Here we go. Coming up on the final laps of the race, got Bill Elliott in the lead, Greg Sachs running second. Bill has to make one more pit stop, they know for sure. Greg Sachs, they believe, can go all the way.
Fans here in Daytona probably still grabbing for their program, trying to figure out just who number 10 is. He is 32-year-old Greg Sachs in a research and development car from DiGard Racing. Sachs has been challenging Bill Elliott for most of the afternoon, and for quite a stretch actually led here. Then zipped into the pits, and when he returned, he was in second spot and has held that position for quite some time.
Greg Sachs takes the lead from Bill Elliott. Behind him, the number 44 car, that's Terry Labonte. He's actually a lap down.
Who drops down low. Remember, the car behind those two, Terry Labonte, is not involved in this front-running race. Greg Sachs, once again, is the leader in the Firecracker 400. And what crazy thoughts must be flashing through the mind of Greg Sachs, who is leading for the first time in his career this late in the race. Remember, problems in Bill Elliott's car as he pulls into the pit. Here's Sam Posey down in there.
All right, Al, this is the pit stop the Elliott hoped they would not have to make. Under the green, coming out of the lead with just 8 laps to go. Just fuel, you can make the rest of the distance now. What's the word on Greg Sachs? Do you think he's going to have to stop?
Oh, no, they won't have to stop. You know, we got a vibration in the car that's hurt our fuel mileage for some reason.
Terry Labonte has got past Greg Sachs, but he's on the tail end of the lead lap. However, because of radio communication issues, we're not sure if Greg Sachs knows this. He's raced him like Terry is in the lead.
And as Labonte and Greg Sachs come out of turn 4, preparing to take the white flag, this last lap could prove interesting if that's the case. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, in the Greg Sachs pit, they're believing that they have this race won. Sachs' wife, Victoria, was there with her fingers crossed. Sachs now moving alongside of Labonte. He certainly is making moves which indicate he believes he needs to finish in front of Labonte. The last lap of the Firecracker 400. Greg Sachs, without question, has removed some of the headline potential from Bill Elliott today. Labonte still in front of Greg Sachs. It would take the unbelievable. Sachs is moving high alongside Labonte, way close to the wall. That definitely confirms it.
Labonte's thinking, good grief, I've never seen somebody race me so hard on the final lap to put me a lap down.
Even in his own mind, Greg Sachs is the winner of the Firecracker 400.
Is that Bill Gardner hugging on Gary Nelson, giving a fist pump? Oh, Bill, what did it cost you? Everything.
They put it all together today. They call this a research and development car. Certainly, I hope
So there it is. Greg Sachs wins. Bill Elliott finishes second. Bobby Allison finishes 18th. And now we jump to the next race at Pocono and a piece that they ran on Bobby Allison and the DiGard situation.
There is the Miller American car driven by Bobby Allison from Hueytown, Alabama. This is the ARCA car that his son Davey normally drives. Bobby earlier this week, or last week actually, announcing that he was leaving the DiGard racing operation. More on that story in this report.
Since winning the national driving title in 1983, Bobby Allison and DiGard Racing have had problems. Few wins and discontent came to a head when Director of Operations for DiGard, Gary Nelson, decided to field a special research and development car. Modified star Greg Sachs was tapped as the driver, and the concept yielded immediate results. The unsponsored and numbered 10 from the Nelson R&D stable captured the Firecracker 400 at Daytona International Speedway on July 4th. For Greg Sachs, it was his first career win, and DiGard racing team members defended their use of an R&D vehicle by saying that Bobby Allison refused to try unconventional race setups and combinations.
I think I was willing to try everything they wanted to try, and I made myself available 7 days a week for any testing that they wanted to do.
But did the win by Sachs precipitate a final divorce between DiGard and Bobby?
Well, it was one of the things that was certainly an effect on the decision. All the conditions affected the decision, but we had contractually agreed to have a one-car effort with all of the effort going to one car, and that really was the key.
So just 5 days ago, Bobby Allison announced his final departure from the DiGard racing operation. And he comes here to Pocono with his own car, built in his own shop and maintained by his own people, all of it located in Hueytown, Alabama. For Bobby Allison, his assistance will come from Donnie Allison and his brother Davey, but the number will remain 22 and it'll still carry the Miller American sponsorship. What about DiGard and Greg Sachs and the old number 22? Well, it's become number 77. Miller remains and Sachs has a dream ride.
Here is the DiGard response to that situation. They said, and Gary Nelson told me on the phone, and again, this is their point of view, that everything that they learned at Daytona was available to Bobby Allison should he want to use it. Gary also told me that the goal from the beginning was to make Bobby a winner all along. Bobby has very much a different viewpoint on that, so there you have it, both sides of the argument.
Now, according to Bobby, it was in his contract they would be a one-car team. We know that multi-car teams were the wave of the future, but back in the early 80s, the 70s, 60s, multi-car teams weren't very successful. And drivers, especially like Bobby Allison, Darrell Waltrip, Dale Earnhardt, did not like the idea of having a second car or teammate. Now, for the longest time, I thought this was driver ego. Not so much, maybe had a little bit to do with it, but it was more to do with resources.
Talking about Bobby Allison getting upset or getting frustrated with the Sachs car. So you were also, and Dad, certainly. Yeah. None of y'all liked the idea of a two-car team.
Oh, no.
Or a teammate.
No. And the reason we didn't like teammates is because we didn't have enough parts.
Oh.
Like, you'd have one set of cylinder head, or you'd have one crankshaft, or you'd have
the carburetor.
Yeah, I mean, you had a trick carburetor. You don't want the other guy to have it. And so it wasn't like it is today where everything, you build engines, he gets out, everybody gets the same thing. There wasn't any such thing back in the day as everybody gets the same thing. You had something special, had a qualifying motor that was special. Well, where are we going to get another one? And that's why nobody liked teammates.
Now we get into a bit of he said. Gary Nelson wanted to try some new things with the car. He said Bobby Allison wasn't on board with trying these things. Bobby said he made himself available to test anytime they wanted. What really frustrated Bobby was the fact they opted to run a second car, which he said was in his contract that they would not do. Not only did they run a second car, they won with the second car. So Bobby is thinking, you're dedicating all these resources to the secondary car instead of focusing on me, the primary. At that point, Bobby had had enough, and he did what Bobby does. Tell you what, I'll take my stuff, head on back, and drive for my own team. Y'all can do whatever you want. Let's take a moment and examine the career of Bobby Allison. Full disclosure, I was born in Alabama. I live in Alabama. In 1990, Governor Guy Hunt passed a law, I could be making this up, that required every state resident to be an Allison fan. I'll say this about Governor Guy Hunt. I don't think he ever belched on TV.
We're getting a slight increase in the number of doses that we'll be getting to the state.
Now, here is my NASCAR Mount Rushmore. I know you're thinking, Benjamin, are you even going to address the fact your governor just about threw up on TV? Nope. Let's just focus on my NASCAR Mount Rushmore. Most agree, Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt. Now, 3 and 4 is debatable. I say Jeff Gordon and David Pearson. You may swap one or both with Jimmy Johnson, Cale Yarborough, Darrell Waltrip, maybe Tony Stewart. How about Kyle Busch? Even Kevin Harvick. What about Bobby Allison? Rarely does he get consideration spot on Mount Rushmore. Let's do a little comparison between Bobby Allison, Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, and Jeff Gordon. The majority of wins for Richard Petty came at Petty Enterprises. Majority of wins for Dale Earnhardt came at RCR. And all of Jeff Gordon's came at Hendrick Motorsports. How about Bobby Allison? Good grief. Had to change the font. I almost can't even see it. It's so small. Bobby raced and won with a lot of different teams. Let's take a look at crew chiefs. Richard Petty, he had Dale Inman. Dale Earnhardt had Kirk Sherwinding. Jeff Gordon had Ray Abraham. How about Robbie Loomis? I didn't realize he had 23 wins with Jeff Gordon. That's a lot. How about Bobby Allison? Again, I got to shrink the font down just to squeeze it in this box. As you can see, there are 19 wins I cannot find the crew chief for. These were back in the 60s and the early 70s. I'm missing 5 from Richard Petty, but I'm missing 19 from Bobby Allison. And the way he went through crew chiefs, there could have been 4, 5 more crew chiefs in there with wins that aren't accounted for. Now, why did I show you all those stats? Does it prove Bobby Allison is a better driver? I don't know. You shouldn't penalize the other drivers for their stability, but it does illustrate who Bobby Allison was, a rolling stone. I feel a song coming on. Do you feel it? I feel it. Where's that music coming from? Bobby was a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his helmet was his home. And when he got tired, he would just go off and drive for his own team. Maybe, just maybe, if Bobby had stuck around for a few years, not burned through so many organizations and people, he might be next to Richard Petty on that Mount Rushmore of one of the all-time great NASCAR drivers. Now, this doesn't mean that every team he left was on bad terms. I'm sure there were plenty of times where he did leave on good terms. But we've all heard the stories about how difficult Bobby Allison could be to work with. Now, back in 1985, the fact that Bobby Allison was allowed to walk away without much of a fight from Bill Gardner should have been a warning sign that DiGard was coming to an end. What kind of businessman was Bill Gardner? He once threatened Roger Penske and Junior Johnson with litigation when they wanted to sign Darrell Waltrip away from DiGard. He was going to have Darrell Waltrip sit out the remainder of his contract with no pay after the 1980 season until Waltrip was able to buy his way out of his contract. But when it came to Bobby Allison, not only was he allowed to leave, he took his Miller American sponsorship with him. Now, I'm not sure the deal they worked out because Greg Sachs continued to run the Miller American sponsorship as well for the remaining races, so that might have softened the blow a little bit for Bill Gardner, allowing him to leave. Following his departure, DiGard competed in only 29 more races. 1985 would be their last full season. They ran 13 races in 1986 and only 3 in 1987 before they shut down. Just like that, one of the most dominant teams of the late 70s and early 80s was gone. They had won 43 races, 1 championship, and finished second in points twice. So what did this R&D experiment cost DiGard? Well, it cost them one championship Hall of Fame driver. Did it result in the demise of DiGard? No, but it certainly expedited what was inevitable. Over the years, DiGard had developed a reputation of a revolving door, a lot of turnover within the organization, and at some point, you've run off all the personnel that made you successful. Bill Gardner owned the team, but his brother Jim actually ran it. And as Jim began to have health issues, Bill was no longer able to find sponsorship money. He opted to sell the team to Bob Whitcomb. Bobby Allison would go on to win 3 more races with the Stavola brothers before being forced to retire during the 1988 season following a terrible accident at Pocono. His tenure at DiGard was the longest of his career, any team that did not bear his name. It also gave him 16 wins and 1 championship, the most success he ever had with any team. Greg Sacks never won another race. His win at the 1985 Firecracker 400 is considered one of the greatest upsets in NASCAR history. And that will do it for this In the Spotlight DiGard, the winning R&D car.